Marcus Thompson worked 60 days in the Georgia sun to save $1,200 for his first car. But when he walked into First National Bank to deposit his hard-earned money, teller Linda Harper looked at the 17-year-old and immediately called it fraud. She didn't ask questions, didn't check records. She simply saw a black teenager with cash and made an assumption that humiliated him in front of everyone in that lobby. What Linda didn't know was that Marcus's mother wasn't just any concerned parent. She was Special Agent Dana Thompson of the FBI, and she walked through those bank doors with her badge and an unshakable determination to dismantle every excuse they tried to hide behind. But just listen to how shocking the turn of events in this confrontation was, and why justice ultimately prevailed when one mother refused to let her son be treated like a criminal for the crime of working hard. The ceiling fans turned lazily, pushing the humid Georgia air in tired circles. Marcus Thompson stood near the entrance of First National Bank, clutching a crumpled white envelope. The kind that made your palms sweat when you knew what was inside mattered. There was $1,200 in crisp bills, each one earned by hours of mowing lawns, trimming hedges, and hauling heavy bags of mulch through the thick summer heat. He'd worked every weekday since June, saving with a single purpose: a used car that would carry him into independence. The bank lobby buzzed softly with the murmur of adults, business people lining up after work, elderly customers chatting quietly with tellers. The air conditioner hummed, but it didn't quite conquer the heat pressing through the glass doors. Marcus wiped his palms on his jeans, took a breath, and stepped forward as the line moved. He rehearsed his words again in his head. "Good afternoon. I'd like to deposit this into my savings account." He wanted to sound calm, professional, like the adults who came here in pressed shirts and shiny shoes. This deposit meant more than just money. It was effort, discipline, pride. Finally, his turn came. The teller's window opened, revealing a woman in her late 40s. Linda Harper glanced up briefly, the corners of her mouth tugging downward as if smiling required too much effort. Her name tag caught the light, but her eyes remained fixed on the envelope. Marcus straightened his shoulders and tried to keep his voice even as he greeted her. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'd like to deposit this money." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she pushed her glasses higher on her nose and reached for the envelope. The faint scent of copia paper and disinfectant filled the space between them. She opened it, flicking through the bills with practiced precision. Then her movements slowed, her brow furrowed, confusion shifting into suspicion. "Where did you get this money?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, not curious, but questioning, as though the words themselves implied accusation. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected that. I worked for it," he stammered. "It's my summer savings." "I do landscaping around the neighborhood." Linda's lips pressed together, forming a thin, dubious line. "Landscaping," she repeated, as though testing the credibility of the word. Her voice lowered, but not enough to hide the judgment lacing it. "I'm sorry, but this looks suspicious. We've had situations like this before. A lot of fraud cases." The word fraud seemed to echo through the lobby, spilling into the silence that followed. A man in line behind Marcus glanced up from his phone, his eyebrows arching with mild curiosity. Another woman looked briefly from her purse, eyes flickering with detached interest, before returning to her own business. Marcus's heart thumped heavily in his chest. He cleared his throat. "There's no fraud, ma'am. I just wanted to deposit it." His voice came out low but steady. Linda didn't seem to hear him. She straightened her back and pressed a button on her station. "I'll need my manager to take a look at this," she said, picking up the deposit slip gingerly between her fingers, as though contact itself might stain her. Marcus stood there, frozen. The quiet was deafening now. He could feel stares, curious, cautious, pitying. His face burned. Someone whispered, "Figures," and another chuckled softly. He wanted to explain, to insist that he'd worked in the blazing sun, earned calluses, skipped outings with friends just to reach this moment, but his voice caught somewhere between his chest and his pride. Linda turned away, already speaking into her headset, describing a questionable deposit from a minor. Her tone was businesslike, detached. To her, this was procedure. To Marcus, it was humiliation. The manager's office door opened halfway across the lobby. Marcus caught a glimpse of a man in a gray suit glancing toward him with a faint look of irritation, as if Marcus had interrupted something important. A wave of heat flooded his chest, sudden and unfamiliar. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was something deeper, something simmering. He didn't shout, he didn't protest, but as he watched them talk about him, not to him, something inside began to shift. That quiet, disciplined space where he'd stored every ounce of patience, every "yes, sir" and "no, ma'am," began to crack. He lowered his gaze to the tiled floor, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Behind the glass, Linda gestured toward the envelope as evidence of her point. The scene blurred in front of him, but the feeling was clear. Disbelief turning to shame, and shame turning to anger. Not the kind that burned out quickly, but the kind that coiled deep inside, silent and steady. The kind that promised this wouldn't be forgotten. 63 minutes. That's how long Marcus sat on the wooden bench outside the bank entrance, staring at the cracked pavement beneath his sneakers. The manager, a balding man named Mr. Grayson, had barely made eye contact when he delivered the verdict. His words were rehearsed, mechanical. "We'll need to file a report with our fraud prevention department." Standard protocol for suspicious deposits. Marcus had nodded numbly, unable to form words. He'd watched Mr. Grayson walk away, watched Linda Harper return to her station as though nothing unusual had happened, watched other customers move through their transactions with ease, people who were believed without question. Outside, the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. The bench felt like an island, isolated from the flow of people entering and leaving the bank. Marcus pressed his palms against his knees to stop them from shaking. His throat ached from holding everything in. The envelope, his money, his summer, was still inside, locked away like evidence at a crime scene. His phone buzzed. Mom's name lit up the screen. "You okay, baby?" Marcus stared at the message. His vision blurred, hot tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. He blinked hard, forcing them back. He didn't want to tell her. Telling her would make it real, would turn this humiliating moment into something she'd have to carry too. She already worked long hours, dealt with enough stress. He didn't want to add to it, but his fingers moved anyway, trembling as they typed. "Bank said my money was fake. They're calling it fraud." He hit send before he could stop himself, then dropped his head into his hands. The weight of it crushed down on him. Not just the accusation, but the unfairness of it all. Every lawn he'd mowed, every early morning start, every time he'd smiled politely at neighbors who watched him work with suspicion in their eyes. It hadn't mattered. None of it had mattered. A woman exiting the bank glanced at him briefly, then looked away quickly, as though his presence made her uncomfortable. 5 minutes later, tires screeched against asphalt. Marcus lifted his head just in time to see a black SUV swing into the parking lot with precision that suggested urgency. The driver's door opened and his mother stepped out. Special Agent Dana Thompson moved with the kind of purposeful calm that made people instinctively step aside. She was tall, her posture military straight, dressed in a navy blazer and slacks that somehow remained crisp despite the Georgia heat. But it was her expression that stopped people mid-stride. Controlled, focused, and radiating an authority that needed no announcement. Marcus stood as she approached. For a moment, their eyes met. She didn't say anything, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then she turned toward the bank entrance. Inside, the lobby hummed with its usual rhythm until Dana walked through the doors. Conversations faltered. A man at the ATM glanced up. The security guard straightened his posture instinctively. Donna's gaze swept the room and landed on Marcus, who'd followed her inside. He stood near the entrance, shoulders still hunched, trying to make himself smaller. Then her eyes shifted to Linda Harper behind the counter. Linda's hands, which had been sorting papers, froze. She folded them nervously, tucking them against her stomach. Donna walked to the counter with measured steps. When she reached it, she pulled out her credentials, a black leather case that opened to reveal her FBI badge and identification card. The metal caught the fluorescent light, casting a brief glint across the counter. "Good afternoon," Donna said. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried the kind of weight that silenced everything around it. "I'm Special Agent Dana Thompson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." She held the badge up long enough for Linda to read every detail, then set it deliberately on the counter between them. "My son informed me that a federally insured bank accused him of committing fraud," she continued, each word precise and unhurried. "I'd like to see the basis for that accusation. Now." The air in the lobby seemed to thicken. Customers who'd been moving toward exits paused. A teenager at the information desk lowered her phone. Even the ceiling fans seemed quieter. Mr. Grayson appeared from his office, his face flushed. "Ma'am, this is standard procedure for unusual deposits." "Unusual," Dana interrupted, her tone unchanged. "Define unusual." He stammered, gesturing vaguely toward the counter. "Large cash deposits from minors. We have to verify." "My son is 17 years old," Dana said, cutting through his explanation. "He worked 60 hours a week doing manual labor to earn $1,200, and you accused him of financial fraud, without evidence, without investigation. Because of what exactly?" Her voice remained level, but the question hung in the air like a challenge. "His age? The fact that he doesn't walk in here wearing a tie?" She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Or is it something else?" The lobby was completely still now. Linda's face had drained of color. Mr. Grayson opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Because from where I'm standing," Dana continued, her eyes never leaving the manager's face, "this looks less like procedure and more like profiling." The word landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Marcus watched his mother, and for the first time since entering the bank, he felt something other than shame. He felt hope. Dana didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words moved through the lobby with the precision of a scalpel, each sentence cutting through excuses with surgical accuracy. "Let's walk through this step by step," she said, her tone measured but unyielding. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, financial institutions are required to report transactions over $10,000. My son deposited $1,200. so that threshold doesn't apply here." Mr. Grayson shifted his weight, clearing his throat. "Well, we also have internal policies about suspicious activity." "Suspicious," Dana repeated, letting the word hang. "According to FinCEN guidelines, suspicious activity requires objective indicators of illegal behavior, structuring, falsified documents, inconsistent information. Which of those applies to a 17-year-old depositing summer earnings?" The manager's mouth opened, then closed. His hand moved to adjust his tie. Dana continued without pause. "Furthermore, under federal anti-discrimination law, specifically the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, financial institutions cannot discriminate based on age, race, or national origin in credit transactions. Deposits fall under that umbrella." A woman near the door had stopped mid-stride, her phone forgotten in her hand. An elderly man at the writing station leaned forward, listening intently. The teenage employee behind the information desk had abandoned all pretense of working. Linda Harper's face had gone from flushed to pale. She glanced toward Mr. Grayson as though seeking rescue, but he offered none. His jaw worked silently, searching for words that wouldn't come. "Your teller," Dana said, gesturing toward Linda without breaking eye contact with the manager, "asked my son where he got the money before even counting it. She flagged it as fraud based on visual assessment alone. That's not procedure. That's presumption." Someone in line whispered, "She's FBI?" Dana didn't acknowledge the question immediately. Instead, she reached into her blazer pocket and produced her business card, placing it next to her badge on the counter. "Yes, Special Agent Dana Thompson, Financial Crimes Division. And before you ask, yes, I investigate banks." The weight of that statement settled over the room like a blanket. Mr. Grayson's face had taken on a grayish hue. He opened his mouth to respond, but Dana wasn't finished. "My son spent 60 days working in 90-degree heat. He turned down time with friends. He showed up early and stayed late because he wanted to earn something for himself. And when he came here, to a federally insured institution that exists to serve the public, he was treated like a criminal." Her voice remained level, but something in it had sharpened. "Not because of anything he did, not because of any evidence, but because someone looked at a black teenager with cash and made an assumption." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. "So here's what's going to happen," Dana continued, her gaze unwavering. "You will process his deposit today, right now. And you will issue a written statement acknowledging that the fraud allegation was made in error and has been withdrawn." She paused, letting each word land with full weight. "You'll also document this incident in your training files as an example of implicit bias in customer service, because this stops here." Mr. Grayson nodded quickly, repeatedly. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. We'll take care of it immediately." Linda had already begun pulling up Marcus's account on her computer, her hands trembling slightly as they moved across the keyboard. Donna turned then, her expression softening as her eyes found Marcus. He stood near the entrance, no longer hunched, no longer trying to disappear. For the first time since walking into the bank, he lifted his head fully, meeting her gaze. The sight of his mother, standing firm, unshakable, wielding knowledge like armor, filled something hollow inside his chest. It wasn't just relief. It was deeper than that. It was the realization that justice wasn't abstract or distant. It was here, now, spoken in clear terms by someone who refused to let injustice pass unchallenged. Hope bloomed in that moment. Not just hope for himself, but for every kid who'd ever been looked at with suspicion instead of respect. For every person who'd been judged before being heard. Around them, the other customers watched with new understanding in their eyes. This wasn't just about a deposit anymore. It was about something larger, a small but significant shift in a system that too often failed people who looked like Marcus. And in that shift, in that moment of accountability, the flame of hope burned steady and bright. Saturday morning arrived with golden sunlight spilling through the kitchen window. Dana sat at the table, her phone pressed to her ear, listening with the focused intensity Marcus had seen countless times before. But this time, he could hear the faint shift in her expression, satisfaction replacing yesterday's controlled anger. The call was from First National Bank's Regional Director of Operations. They'd spent the night reviewing everything: security camera footage showing Marcus's interaction at the counter, recorded phone calls between Linda Harper and the manager, internal emails discussing the incident, and a thorough audit of their handling procedures. "We take these matters seriously," the director said, his voice tinny through the speaker. "Ms. Harper has been placed on immediate suspension pending a full review. We're also implementing mandatory implicit bias training across all branch locations." Dana listened, her pen moving across a notepad in precise strokes. "And the statement?" "Being drafted now. We'll acknowledge the bias in procedural judgment and issue a formal apology to your son. It'll be released by end of business today." When she hung up, Dana found Marcus standing in the doorway, still in his sleep shirt, eyes wide with disbelief. "They actually listened," he said quietly. "They didn't have a choice," Dana replied, setting her phone down. "But yes, they listened." By noon, Marcus's deposit had cleared. The money appeared in his account with a notation that made him pause. "Deposit processed. No irregularities found." Those 4 words felt like vindication typed into a banking system that had doubted him just 24 hours earlier. That afternoon, Marcus bought the car. It was a 2015 Honda Civic, silver with minor scratches on the bumper and seats worn smooth by previous owners. The seller, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, smiled when she handed him the keys. "You worked hard for this, didn't you?" she asked. Marcus nodded, gripping the keys tightly. "Yes, ma'am." "I really did." But as he slid into the driver's seat for the first time, the feeling was different than he'd imagined all summer. It wasn't just excitement or freedom. The car represented something deeper now. Proof that he'd survived a moment designed to break him. Proof that he'd stood in that bank lobby, humiliated and doubted, and emerged with his dignity intact because someone fought for him. That evening, Marcus drove home with Dana in the passenger seat. The streetlights flickered on as dusk settled over the neighborhood, casting soft amber halos across the pavement. The engine hummed steadily, a comforting rhythm beneath their silence. Marcus glanced at his mother, her profile illuminated by passing lights. "You always come through, don't you?" he whispered. Donna turned to him, and her smile was gentle, not the steel-edged authority from yesterday, but something warmer. "One day you'll come through for someone else," she said. "That's how we change things. Not all at once, but person by person, moment by moment." Marcus nodded slowly, her words settling into the quiet space between them. He understood now what yesterday had really been about. It wasn't just about $1,200 or a deposit. It was about a system that too often presumed guilt instead of innocence, that saw suspicion instead of potential. But it was also about resistance, about refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. As they pulled into the driveway, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Anger transformed into purpose, pain alchemized into strength. The system had tried to fold him small, to make him doubt his worth. But he'd stood tall, and more importantly, he'd learned that standing tall sometimes meant having someone stand beside you until you remembered your own height. Justice hadn't just been restored, it had planted seeds. Seeds of awareness in those bank customers who witnessed what happened. Seeds of accountability in a system forced to examine its biases. Seeds of determination in a 17-year-old who now understood that strength isn't just enduring, it's inheriting the will to fight back, to speak up, to refuse silence when silence means surrender. The car engine ticked softly as it cooled. Marcus sat for a moment longer, keys in hand, before finally stepping out into the evening air. Tomorrow, he'd drive to his landscaping jobs. But tonight, he'd earned something more valuable than transportation. He'd earned the knowledge that his voice mattered, his dignity was non-negotiable, and his future was his own to build, one hard-won moment at a time.